the 360. No action.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric on a continuing series, the Unported playlist, where I take a look at some of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. Today we're taking a look at Sega Water Ski on the Model 2. If you've been following along with the channel, you know I love featuring these giant amusement cabinets because 1, they're almost impossible to find these days, and 2, it talks about preservation, how good emulation is at keeping games alive that otherwise we would never find. Before we get too far involved though, if you do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link in the description below as well. But I remember Sega Water Ski being in arcades the same way that the skiing games and skateboarding games were, and I always wanted to play them because outside of your normal arcade games, your fighting games, beat 'em up and shmups, a big component of 90s arcades were giant amusement cabinets where the control scheme was something that you couldn't experience at home. Of course, you know, a fighting game in the arcades would look better than it would on your Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, but you could still play them at home. But something like Sega Water Ski was an arcade exclusive because you had giant water skis that you stood on to control your character. Now of course these are missing here and we're using an analog stick, but that's what was so great about the amusement cabinets is they allowed you an experience that you were never used to before. Now weird fact, I did grow up water skiing. My best friend growing up, his grandparents had a house on the lake and we probably spent 75-80 days in the summer in high school just going out water skiing and drinking on a boat. So I'm technically a pretty good water skier, although I'm better at actual snow skiing. But I just love water skiing and I love arcade games, so of course I'm going to love this game. But the reason I include these type of games in the list is 1, because I get to talk about preservation, because if we didn't have Model 2 emulation, this game would basically be lost, because I have not seen a Sega Water Ski cabinet for probably 2 decades. Outside of the late 90s, I don't think I've seen one. So definitely leave a comment in the description below and tell me if you've seen one, because every time I talk about these big amusement cabinets, somebody says that there's one in a museum somewhere or their local arcade in some small town still has one that works, and I absolutely love finding out that these things are still in existence because I know at least somewhere in the world somebody can enjoy it. That's always super fun for me to hear because if you've been watching my channel whatsoever, you know I'm a big proponent of preservation. I try to preserve and dump unreleased betas, alphas, and games when I get around to finding them, and I just love talking about arcade games that still exist because the emulation is good enough. If you do want to play any of the Model 2 games, the ones that were or weren't ported, I'll leave a link below to the Model 2 emulator. It is abandoned, but it works perfectly fine. It's very easy to map the controls. But you'll see there, I finished the first course. There are 3 in the game, and I got a C. And your entire score is based on how well you execute tricks off the jumps. Now, it can be a little tricky, pun intended, to do that with an analog stick, but you just need to basically flick it in certain directions at the right time. But let's move on to Pawpaw River. This game has 3 courses, and I love as they animate and you get these little model versions of it showing you the course. They are quite quaint, and I always thought that Model 2 air graphics looked incredible. It was better than what the Saturn, Nintendo 64, PlayStation could do, and had this come home as a home console, I would have absolutely loved it. But moving on, the game isn't difficult whatsoever. This isn't the type of game that you're going to play for longevity. Of course you could do score attacks and try to get better and try to get into the first ranking position. This is the type of game you download and emulate to experience it and to know it still exists and it's still alive. And that's why I always find a spot on Unported playlists for these type of games, which aren't the deepest games in the world, but it's great to know they're alive because in arcades, amusement cabinets are still a thing. They're not as big as they used to be, but because computers at home and consoles are so powerful now, arcades don't have the graphical edge anymore that they used to in the 90s. So what do modern arcades do? They make cabinets and experiences that are otherwise impossible to do at home. The control scheme, the cabinet, something about modern arcade games has to differentiate itself from what you can play at home to get you to get into the arcades. But I also love the soundtrack to Sega Water Ski, so go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds and I'll come back and tell you more about why it's a fun game to play and awesome from a preservation standpoint. But enjoy.
Where it going? Get going! Cool action!
It's got that bright, cheery soundtrack that Sega's known for, and it works absolutely perfect in the water ski kind of tropical perspective. But leave me a comment down below. I've been thinking about doing a video series, or maybe just a single video, a little bit more elaborate than most, where I acquire one of these very complicated control scheme arcade games, something like Sega Water Ski, and I try to fully adapt it over to a standard analog controller, because basically almost everything can be adapted. I've shown that with my Beastbusters conversion. I converted a Hyper Neo Geo driving motherboard over to use an analog flight stick. There's a lot of ways to make these things work, and I've always been wondering if people on the channel would be interested in seeing something in depth like that, or if it's going to be days worth of work for 400 views, which, don't get me wrong, I love doing the work either way, but maybe I could just do it in my spare time. But yeah, Sega Water Ski, it's just one of those games that Sega made. They had snowboarding games, they had skiing games, they had skateboarding games. Sega loved making sports titles for the arcade and those big amusement cabinets with really interesting control schemes. And like I said earlier, I just love how Model 2 looks. It looks like the Sega Saturn times 2 if you just duct tape two together and somehow magically made the power combine. But why isn't something like this ported? Well, one, yeah, you could get it on a standard controller, but there's only 3 courses and the game takes maybe 10 minutes to complete. So that's not really the type of game that you're going to be available to sell in a home market. People aren't going to pay you $50 to play something for 10 minutes and be done with it. Unless it's a fighting game where you can use it for versus mode with your friends, because of course you can beat a fighting game in under 10 minutes if you were good. But I love that this still exists, and this is why emulation is so incredible, because I can safely say if we couldn't emulate these big amusement cabinets like Sega Water Ski, like Prop Cycle, like Skate Champ, then it would be almost impossible to find one. Because like I said, I haven't seen this game since the 90s. So 100%, if you know where there's one around, leave a comment down below. And hey, if it's within driving distance of Chicago, I would probably go out and play it just to say one more time that I played one of my favorite Sega games from the arcades in the 90s. But short of that, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. If you do, I'll do a somersault for you. But I will be back next Sunday, another episode in the Unported playlist, and I'll have videos on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday as well. But also leave me a comment if you grew up water skiing. I don't know many people that do, and I want to go again. It's been years since I've been, but in my head I still remember how to do it, and in my head I know that I can still ski, even though I don't get much of a chance to do it in Chicago. So maybe one day I'll put up a water skiing video. Probably not though. And this may be the last amusement cabinet video I do, because I think I may have run out of amusement sized cabinets that actually emulate well. I'll keep looking around because I know people do like these videos, but I may have hit the end of the line in one aspect of Unported playlist. Don't worry, I'm going to keep making these until I actually literally run out of unported arcade games I like, and that might take a few years. But as far as the big giant cabinets with the crazy control schemes, there's more out there. They just don't work in MAME or have an emulator standalone to support them. But if there's anything that I haven't covered as far as these big cabinets are concerned that you know work and you want to see, just leave me a comment down below and I will probably make it. Short of that, thanks so much for watching, guys. We will see you next time when we are across the finish line. Bye bye.
Get going! Cool action!